Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us at the Audio Description Narrators of America Know Your Narrator series. Today, we're very honored to have Inger Tudor with us. Thanks for joining us, Inger.
Thanks, Roy, for having me. Yay.
Great to have you. Oh, we'd love to introduce our audience a little bit to you. Is there any chance you could give us like a little rundown of your life experience, your career experience? What would you like to share?
Oh, my goodness.
Put you on the spot.
You put me on the spot. Let's see. I am originally from Cincinnati, Ohio. I've lived in New York, LA, London, and Boston. I actually have a law degree, and I was a practicing litigation attorney very briefly until I came to the awareness, realization, or to some would say came to my senses. And as someone pointed out to me, another attorney said that what I liked was acting in a courtroom. So they said, go act. And I thought about it and I prayed about it. And I was like, you know what? They're absolutely right. And I was taking the safe route. Let me go do what I want to do. Mm-hmm. That's how I ended up as an actor.
That's great. Were you acting prior to studying law?
Oh, yes. All through high school, college, and law school. Because the law school I was at had a drama society. So I even directed and acted in law school.
It's always been a part of you then.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. And you said New York, Ohio, LA. Those aren't in the right order. Ohio, New York, California, London. Like what was your favorite city, or what is your favorite city?
Oh, wow. I'm torn between LA and New York because there are things about New York that I miss, like the walking around and being able to go on a street and find a random book fair or whatever, because it's much more of a walking city. I mean, there definitely are parts of LA that are walking cities, but LA has, it just has openness and space, and I like the lifestyle here in terms of the healthiness, and also as much as I like the pace of New York, I kind of prefer that slightly slower pace of LA.
Gotcha.
Plus, I like not having to lug my groceries on the subway. Thank you very much.
Wow, that's a different kind of challenge. So
yes.
In Los Angeles, that's where you started doing audio description narration? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. When I had done some voiceover when I was in New York, things like a few radio commercials and then some museum exhibits, that kind of thing. Oh. And then I came here and initially was focusing mostly on film and television and doing some theater on the side because I can't not do theater. Sorry about the double negative. And then I finally found a way to get into doing the voiceover again, because when I initially moved here, I found it a little hard to find my way into it. And then I started doing, a few corporate industrials, that kind of thing in terms of narration. And eventually a job as the announcer for divorce court sort of fell in my lap. And from there, I was able to get a voiceover agent. And then from there, I was able to do more radio commercials and other things. And that also led me to doing voiceover narration at WGBH, which does a lot of voiceover narration for film and television, as you well know. And actually, my connection there, I know because he is a playwright. And one of the first plays that I did when I lived in LA, he was the author of.
Wow, very great.
So so my theater sort of brought me into this. It took many years for that connection to sort of happen. But yes, that's how I ended up doing that.
If we could go back just a little bit, you said you were doing performance, for example, in theater or maybe film and TV. And did any of that inform your voiceover work even before you started doing audio description narration? Was there some sort of bridge or connection there?
Well, I did forget to say this. So actually, the way I really started doing any kind of voiceover was I was a DJ for 4 years in college.
Oh, there we go.
Our college radio station. And as part of announcing one of the other jobs we had to do the PSAs, we had to do, the sort of radio spots. And as I became more facile at doing them, then other people would also have me do them for their shows. So when I graduated from college, that was sort of what prompted me to think, oh, well, I kind of did this in college. Maybe I could do this. So I took voiceover class when I was still in Boston and got a couple of radio commercials. And then when I moved to New York, that was what made me start looking for voiceover there. So initially, it was just DJing that got me into it. And then, of course, I think with a lot of actors, the more training you get and the more you have to work on voice and speech and diction, you realize how much it helps you as a voiceover narrator. And so things that I never noticed, like for instance, I'm from Cincinnati, which is on the border of Kentucky. And we have a slight Southern accent, which I never noticed about my own speech. But I had a voice teacher who kept pointing out these things that I did. And I'm not going to tell you what they are because I don't want you looking for them. But he kept saying, oh, you do this and you do that. And it wasn't until he pointed out, I was like, oh, I'm dropping that letter, or, oh, this sound isn't quite right. So the training for acting has helped me to be, I think, clearer in my delivery for the voiceover narration.
Oh, that's great. And it also sounds like in addition to that training, your experience, even with doing the PSAs as a DJ, that has got to have, I don't know, what was that like for you? Like as you kept doing them, did it stay the same? Did you find ways where you could grow, or was it pretty much, hey, I got this. This is how it works?
Well, I definitely think you find ways in which you can grow. And part of it is the more you listen to yourself, because and I'm sure you've experienced this. When I first got used to hearing my own voice, I did not like it at all. And then as I was forced to listen to it, because you also, as a DJ, they encourage you to listen to your shows so that when you do your next show, you can improve. And once you're forced into that practice, you start noticing things like, oh, this didn't sound quite right, or, oh, it came out like this, but I know my intention was that. And so you start to become aware of things you need to do so that what you're trying to get across actually comes across with clarity to the audience. I mean, you can't control necessarily how it's received, but at least you can do your part in trying to put it out there in a particular way, if that makes sense.
Oh, it sure does. And that's a great word, intentions, that you were even doing that when you were, it sounds like throughout your performance career that the intentions has always been a part.
It definitely, I think initially it was more just the listening to it and trying to figure out what I wasn't doing right. But as I started acting more and as I started getting more acting training, then, and because, they focus so much on intention and objectives and why are you doing what you're doing. And so the more I started thinking about that as a narrator, the more that helped. And then oddly enough, I started getting narrator jobs as an actor. So one of the gigs that I did when I think maybe my first year acting in New York, I played a narrator for this gospel musical that toured overseas, because the premise of the musical was that a DJ was doing a retrospective on the radio. And so every time they put on a record for this particular artist that they were doing the retrospective of, then that was the scene in the play. And the only reason I got that, again, one of those things that fell in my lap, was a friend of mine from college had gone in for the part. And she said, this is not right for me, but I have a friend who used to DJ in college and she'd be perfect for this. And so I auditioned and got the role.
So it's like you were almost meta. So you were a DJ playing a DJ. So it's
yes, exactly.
Acting and DJ. What?
Yes, exactly how I feel when I play lawyers. I'm like, oh, this is very weird.
Comes naturally?
A little bit, just a little bit.
But I guess even in both of those experiences, like when you're playing a lawyer or when you're quote unquote playing a narrator, that you're still bringing some sort of acting, or are you still bringing some sort of intentions?
Yes, you definitely are. And I think even more so when you're playing a narrator, because, your job with narrating is you are trying to tell a story. Actually, I think your job in any kind of acting is you're trying to tell a story. And so there are certain, you have to be aware of your voice. You have to be aware of what you're conveying. And a lot of times, you also have to be aware of how you're holding your body and what you're doing with your body, because that also affects what is coming across in your voice.
Mm. Is there like maybe an example that you could share about that? Like, how do you change your body, for example, in an audio description narration? I'm putting you on the spot again, aren't I?
Yes, you are. Well, I think sometimes in an audio description narration, I would have to be honest and say I don't get to do it quite as much, because depending on the show you're narrating, there is a level of, for lack of a better word, smoothest continuity that they want. However, when you get things that are a little more action-based, sometimes I find myself like I'll lean in a little bit more and I'll get a little quieter, because you're getting a little more intense with the action. John ran down the street and the storm came crashing by and the ambulance roared and whatever. And so you'll find yourself holding yourself in a different way, because now the action has intensified. Gotcha. If that makes sense.
Well, it sounds like, yeah. And with that, like, that sounds like intentions in those moments of whatever, that while, and still simultaneously maintaining that continuity.
Continuity, yeah.
So you're finding that balance of performance within that very specific script, right?
Yes, exactly. And like I said, though, it just depends on the movie or the television show, because some, they just want more of a sort of generic, smooth voiceover that just sort of goes along. And then for others, they do want a little bit more of a personality, or someone whose narrative description goes with the mood of whatever the particular film or television show is. And that's the other thing I think you also have to stay very aware of when you're doing the project. And depending on who you're working with, sometimes they'll tell you, like, sometimes they'll just let you do what you want. But then other times they'll say, okay, they don't want any kind of, they don't want you to get any kind of mood or anything with that. They want it pretty smooth and just generic all the way through. So, okay, I'm not gonna dig in as much with fitting the mood of the show as I might with, like a period piece that's got a darker nature, or a comedy that might be light and fluffy. And so your reading is a little bit lighter and not as dramatic as it might be for some, a 1 hour show.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that awareness, especially when you're being directed, you have to make your adjustments to meet that.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, what do you love about audio description? Like, you've been doing this for a while now.
I said this to you before. I still feel like a neophyte, personally. I've been doing it maybe, I think, just about 4 years. It'll be about 4 years in June. And I love a couple of things about it. It's one of the few times where automatically that you're doing an acting job that has more of a purpose than just entertaining. And the idea of the service component, for lack of a better word, that you're doing something that is helping a community is rewarding, and it's enriching, and it's nice to know that your acting work can do that. So that is one of the things that I really enjoy about it. The other thing that this is just my pure personal enjoyment. The other thing I enjoy about it is getting to see movies and television shows before they come out.
Very good.
So I definitely enjoy that part of it. And then also, I think doing the narrative description on a regular basis, I think, has made me more aware, and I like to think a little bit better in the readings that I give when I go in for auditions for voiceover for commercials, or voiceover for whether it's like an industrial or a video game or something like that, or some sort of animated series. I think not just the working continuously, because it's like anything else. If you exercise a muscle, the muscle gets stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that as well. But also, as we were just talking about, understanding like the different moods and the different genres and knowing how you need to fit that also helps you in the other kind of voiceover work that you can do.
Wow. So audio description has actually affected your other voiceover performances or
Yes,
practice?
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I would definitely say that.
Wow. Well, what are some if I could also put you on the spot, what are some other challenges that you've faced in doing audio description, like your own sense of, I mean, you've called yourself a neophyte, but you've been doing it for 4 years. That's over 1,000 days. You know, it's like, I mean, there's something about that it sounds like your you keep saying awareness, and that tells me that you still are finding ways to grow.
Well, definitely. I find that one of the things that I like to accomplish when I go in to narrate a show is trying to make it as smooth as possible. I don't mean in terms of my voice, I mean in terms of the whole process. So little things I try to be aware of, like if I can come a little bit early and have a chance to look at the script before, so that I can identify names or words where I'm going to need a pronunciation and I don't want to stop us in the middle to figure out, you know, how to say this name or the name of this city or what have you. Or sometimes just in the way that it's done. So, you know, how we go through, let's say, the whole 1 hour show, and then at the end, you'll go back and fix different things. So just in terms of, again, trying to keep the process smooth, what I try to do is, as I watch them going back through to figure out what they need to correct, I try to also get my script, like to sort of follow them with my script to see where they are. So when they say, okay, we need to pick up card 14 on page 23, I'm already there. So I'm not rifling through my script to get to that point, you know, which is then taking more time, because like any job in the industry, time is money. So, you know, the more efficient you can be about doing it, I think that also helps too, because then they know, okay, well, this is a narrator that's not only good, but they're also efficient in terms of time and how they do this job. So let's bring them back in for more things, because we know it's not going to take us as long to do this with this person as it might with this person.
Gotcha. And so you're bringing that, and that's beyond, obviously that's clearly beyond performance or intention, that you're anticipating what they need. And it sounds like such a good collaboration.
It is. And I think that I will say, okay, so 4 years, right? 1,000 days. Good point, Roy.
But, it's closer to like 1,400, you know?
Okay. All right. Fine.
I don't have a calculator. Somebody.
Okay, fine. But as you know, we're not working every day. So there is that. But also it is a collaboration in the sense of you start to get used to who's in the booth, who the engineer is, and also who's running the session. So as you start to know different people's styles, you also know how to anticipate certain things. Like, for instance, if I know, here I go saying my little foibles, but if I know, for instance, I have an issue with SKS, like on desks, and things like that, I know there are particular people running the session where they're going to nail that every time. And so I know if I miss it, I know they're going to come back and get it, and I don't have to worry about that. But then it also makes me a little more on my toes about making sure I hit it so that you get the K and the S, or the S, K, and S. But it just little things like that. So it becomes a collaboration, because as you start to work with the same people over and over again, you know what they look for and what they need. And you also know how to ask them to help you. So you can say, like if they give you a redirection, but they just say, okay, can you do that line again? You can say, is it because it didn't come out like this? Or do you need it to be faster? Or because sometimes if you don't know the why you're redoing the line, you'll do it in the exact same way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just, making the same mistake, if that's what it was, if there was a mistake. So being able to also ask, okay, why do we need to redo this? Especially if you were doing it and you're like, wait a minute, I don't think I messed up there. Because then you'll know, oh, it wasn't that I messed up. It needed to sound more like a conclusion, and I made it lift at the end, so it sounded like we were going to another thing. And so then the next time to do it that way. That was very long-winded. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's great. And it brings up so many points about the relationships you have with the other people that are involved in audio description. One of the conversations that seems to be happening in our communities who listen to audio description is the distinction between a general term describers and what, like, I guess originally audio description was basically written, narrated, and created by one single person, and it sounds like
goodness.
But it's evolved, right? So
yes,
now it's obviously you're a narrator. There's a writer who obviously does incredible work, and you're also mentioning the engineer and the director. From your experience, can you talk about maybe some of those other roles and how you relate to them? I mean, you gave some great examples with how you respond to the person who's running the session.
Well, and then sometimes So for instance, I never deal directly with the writer. So usually whoever's running the session, they will occasionally, if we are reading something and we realize that the flow is just a little bit off, or that what we're saying as we're watching the picture is not actually what's happening. Like maybe when they watched it, they thought they were pulling the door too, but you realize they actually jerked it or they slammed it or something like that. Then sometimes I'll talk to the person running the session, or they'll say to me, okay, we're going to change this because we realized they weren't doing X, they were doing this. And then sometimes I'll notice, I'm like, hey, we said it was this, but that's not quite the right word for what they're doing. And they'll go, oh yeah, you're right. Let's change it to this. So again, it's that starting to work with people and know them well enough to know, okay, I can make a suggestion and I know this person will take it for what it's worth and either will fix it or they'll go, it's not that important. It's like, okay, moving on. And so you just start to have that relationship. So usually I think the main person that you have that kind of relationship with is the person running the session. Sometimes it'll be the engineer as well, because the engineer will know if there maybe is a particular thing that you're doing with your voice that you don't realize. Like maybe you're taking a bigger breath or there's a weird click that you have or something. So the engineer can also help you with that and say, oh, when you get to this word, you seem to be doing this. And that's like, oh, okay, thank you. So I now have that awareness not to do that when we get there.
Sounds like a great
Did that answer your question?
Oh, it's a great collaboration. It seems like, I can't imagine the work that the writers do, the countless hours of watching the show and trying to translate it and fit it between the lines. It's really fascinating to see how these scripts come together so cleanly. It's almost something that, as a narrator, I take advantage of because it flows so perfectly.
And it's also, I think everything you said is true. And then when you add the element of not only are they having to come up with a description that will make sense to someone who is watching the show but can't actually see the images, they also have to do it under the time constraint of, I've only got these many seconds to fit in this description before a character starts talking. It really is impressive what they are able to do.
Mm-hmm. And with all due respect, you're able to deliver that in a way that brings the audience within that emotional nuance of what's happening on screen, that it is, everybody's working together.
Yes, everybody's working together and working hard.
Yes. Well, where do you see audio description going? What would you like? Where do you see it going? Where would you like to see it going? It's a really general question, wherever you want to take it.
There are two things come to mind. First, what I'd really love to see, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but I'd like to see more things be union. I would really like to see more projects be union projects. I mean, obviously, I am a union person, so I can only do union projects, but I know there are other projects out there that I can't do because I am union. They're non-union projects. So I would like to see more narrators joining the union so that so all of us as a group have certain protections and certain rights. And we know that, there's a certain level of quality that we can be assured is going to happen because they're dealing with people who are in a union. So that is one of the things I'd like to see. The other thing I'd like to see is other areas where a narrative description would be helpful. I know they're doing it in video games. I don't know if it's through the whole industry or just certain games. And then also, I know they do it at museums, but I would love to be able to do more of that because I will describe the history and narration at museum exhibits, but I have not had a chance to be part of actually describing the art.
Oh, you'd be so good at that.
That would be really fun. I love that. And I just think there are probably other areas that are just not coming to my mind right now where, like a museum exhibit, it would be great to have someone describe what's going on. Like, for instance, at a planetarium or something like that. Especially when they have they do the presentations, to have someone to describe that would also be interesting. And there are other things, but like I said, I'm sure I'm not thinking of them now, and we'll finish and I'll go, here are the 5 other places that I could think of right now.
So many opportunities. And it's funny not funny. It's so great to see how those opportunities are growing for access for our communities. And even with the museums, going back to what you said earlier about the audio description within TV shows and movies, because you're limited in TV shows and movies to this really tight little space that in a museum, you'd have that flexibility and time freedom to go into that nuance and detail.
Yes. And I think that would make a difference. And honestly, for something like that, like a piece of art, I would even want to hear that narrative description because they might say something in describing it that maybe you hadn't noticed in just looking at it that will make you go, I hadn't thought of it that way. So I think it's something that a lot of people could benefit from.
So as a sighted person, you see the benefits beyond just blind and low vision audiences.
Absolutely.
Yay, that's great. One of the things that got me excited a few years ago was when a voiceover talent who was also a writer of children's books, illustrated children's books, came to me and said what she wanted. And obviously the tie-in was, well, I'm doing audio description narration. Why don't you write out what's happening in the visuals so our blind readers can know what they're seeing? It's great to see all these acts. Even on Facebook, I think there's a group where people post memes or images from the internet and ask people to share what's in the image. And, we can always do that. Yeah, and we're doing that with alt text. That's really easy to do on any social media, to add the description of the image that you're posting. And I see a lot more sighted people getting on board with that. It's really exciting.
And it's a good way for things to be moving so that, I think there are a lot of things that we can take for granted just because we see them and we don't even think twice about what that means, that you can see it and that someone else may not be able to see it as clearly. And to make it as equal as it can be so that everyone can get the same enjoyment out of, the things they want to participate in and the things they want to go to or the things they want to hear or watch, for lack of a better word, is, I think, important.
Oh, that's great. Well, is there anything else, Inger, that you'd like to share with our audiences?
I can't think of anything
Where can we
other
follow you?
than
Oh, go ahead.
where
Go.
can you follow me? You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all those things. Oh, and which doesn't need a audio description narration. As I mentioned to you before, I have been, since we have all been quarantined, I've been doing a poem a day, which is all, much more audio than it is visual. So you can catch my poem a day on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
I'd love to ask, if we could, just a little quick postscript. How did you start doing poem a day? How did that come about? And
well, when we first found out that we had the stay-at-home order, I had been thinking about doing something with poetry, because I write poetry, not as consistently as I would like, but I write poetry and used to write a lot more of it, and did a lot of it in high school, all through college. It's always been one of the things that I've been drawn to, even as a very little kid, was poetry. And I had been thinking about, it might be fun to get together and maybe do a poetry podcast or something like that. And then when I was like, okay, we're stuck every day in the house, there's got to be some way to stay creative and bring art to people. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do a poem a day, and hit the Facebook Live button, get up and do a poem, 5 minutes tops. Most of them are like 2 or 3 minutes. And it's just a way to contribute every day to art and literature, going out to everyone. And I mean, it's not like I have 50,000 views or anything, but it's just nice that people seem to be enjoying it. And I notice that people are sharing it with other people, and I get requests for different poems. And I try to do poems for, like, we did a particular poem for Ramadan, and one for Passover, and another for Easter, as well as Earth. Did I do one for Earth Day? Well, I tried to make sure I had one that had something nature oriented in it for Earth Day, but just, just a way to, one, stay creative, but two, also to contribute some art to this time where we're all stuck in the house.
And you said you're on Facebook Live. What's how can we find your poem a day? Is that
on Facebook? You can just do Facebook.com/Inger Tudor, and for Twitter and Instagram, both of them are at Inger Tudor.
Oh, that's easy. Very good. Thank you so much for being a part of Know Your Narrator. It was great.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks again, Inger.
Okay, bye.